Hello, everyone. Bonjour. I am Sebastiano. I work at JetBrains on package search. I am a GD on Android, Flutter, and Identity. I love Kotlin and I love Compose, but I'm not here to talk about any of those things today. Today, I am going to teach you some of the things that I've learned over time when using the IDEs, Android Studio, IntelliJ. I'm using IntelliJ 22.1 right now, but it doesn't matter because I think almost everything that I'm going to show you today also works with Android Studio. You can find the slides, as you can see, is marked down, for this talk at this address down here. I realize it might be a bit small, but I cannot zoom it too much. But if you look at my Twitter at SEEBROCK3R, that's my complicated Twitter handle. I will also be tweeting the link, and you will find the link somewhere, I think, on the app or the website as well for the repo, right? So, yeah. I might be showing some sample code depending on the timing today. The code is terrible. Do not copy it. It will make you dumb. It's broken. It's just to show how to improve things, so it's partly purposely bad. Just putting that out there. OK, let's start. First of all, what is an IDE? What is a code editor? A code editor is something that is more lightweight than an IDE and is more focused on, well, editing code. The main point of a code editor is the area where you go typey. And in contrast to that, IDEs include other tools that might be visual design tools, that might be database inspection, network profilers, that kind of stuff that you don't normally find in a code editor. And there is some point you can get a code editor to get it closer to what an IDE is by using plugins. But generally speaking, there are some things that, yeah, I know I'm not connected. There's a few things that you cannot really get with a code editor that an IDE will give you. And, well, how does that work? That works with the magic of indexing. Indexing is essentially a time-consuming process to a point that the IDE makes to understand your project. It wants to know where your stuff is, what's its name, understand how data moves around, how the code is structured. It does take time, but on the other hand, you get some very nice features that we're going to see some of them that you don't get with a code editor. And although indexing can be a bit slow, there's a relatively recent thing in the IntelliJ platform that is called shared indexes. We provide, as JetBrains, shared indexes of Jdks and some other things as well, I think. So that will save you time from indexing them. The IDE will ask you, do you want to download the index for that stuff so you don't have to recalculate it locally? If you have a decent internet connection, that's going to be faster. There's also other things that are paid, I'm not going to be talking about, that you can have with IntelliJ Ultimate, I think, where you can build a shared index of your project. So if, say, you have a giant monorepo where you have a gazillion things in there and indexing takes forever, and project shared indexes are fairly useful because then that job has been done by maybe a CI server somewhere, and your IDE just gets that, and it works very quickly. When we talk about Android Studio is based on IntelliJ IDEA community, which is an open source IDE. The main difference between Android Studio and IntelliJ community is that IntelliJ community supports a variety of build systems and kinds of projects, whereas Android Studio, as the name suggests, is very focused on just Android projects. And you have to be using Gradle to build those projects, unless you build with Bazel, I guess, but then the story is a bit different. There is not officially part of Android Studio. You can have a plugin for that. Android Studio, there's one important thing to know, which is it lags behind IntelliJ IDEA platform. So when you see JetBrains saying, oh, we have the new version of IntelliJ, what happens is generally the next version of Android Studio will be based on that version of IntelliJ. So the features that you saw on the blog post announcing a new version of IntelliJ will be in the next canary version of Android Studio. And then how much time it takes to get to stable, it depends. Just remember, there's also, like you see all the stuff in blue, those are links. If you go to the repository at the end, It will bring you to documentation, to things like, in this case, this table is fairly useful in case you're wondering which version of IntelliJ's Android Studio are actually using. Then that is a fairly good mapping to tell you. Now, when you're coding, you can do things the way you prefer. I want to put it out there. It's like there is no right or wrong way, but there is a way that is more productive, that is faster, but that requires training yourself to use it, and that's using keyboard shortcuts. The important thing is that you don't try and learn everything at once. That's not going to work. Just trying to cram 15 new things in your head at the same time, you're going to forget all of them. So maybe get used to it a bit at a time. Try to understand, OK, I'm doing this, and every time I'm typing and I need to move the hand to the mouse or to the trackpad and go and fish some function somewhere in the UI. That is not ideal because it kind of interrupts the flow of coding. There is an interesting tool that I want to highlight, which is in the help menu. There is my productivity here, and that will show you how many times you've used certain features. It will tell you, like, oh, go to action, go to class. I don't know exactly, because this is a fresh install of IntelliJ, so it doesn't seem like I use any of the things in the IDE. That's not the case. It's just a fresh install. But it's fairly interesting because then you can go every now and then and be like, oh, I've been trying to learn this feature, and how many times have I actually used it? This will tell you. It's fairly nice. Also does the nice thing of saying, oh, saved you this much time with this, that much time with that. It's kind of like finger in the air, obviously. There are plugins that you can use to also improve your productivity. Famous one would be Key Promoter X. Obviously, I'm offline. That's not going to work. I should have thought about that. It doesn't matter. So there's a plugin that is called Key Promoter X. And whenever you click something, it will pop up a notification that says, oh, you've done this X number of times, and that's the shortcut you would use instead. It's trying to remind you, trying to kind of force you to use keyboard shortcuts. I don't like it too much because it, to me, feels a bit passive-aggressive. What I prefer instead is Presentation Assistant. I'm going to talk about that later, which is just showing what the keyboard shortcut would have been, but it doesn't get to, oh, you should have done that instead. There's also another plugin that is fairly useful, but I've never really used as much, which is called IDE Features Trainer. It is something that in the IDE itself shows you, like it's kind of like you can think about it as a tutorial in a video game that shows you how to do common things so that you kind of learn by doing instead of learning by reading the documentation online. There is also the hardcore mode, if you want, which is to hide all of the UI and just use the keyboard. That might take some practice to get used to. Or you can even go the extra mile and install IDEA Vim, which is a plugin that turns IntelliJ into Vim, but easier to quit because you can still use the mouse. OK. When we're talking about keyboard shortcuts, the concept of Keymap is important. The way the IDE understands what you're trying to do with a certain key combination is called a Keymap. It's a collection of all the keyboard shortcuts, and it's something you can find in the preferences. The keymaps by default are different between macOS and Windows and Linux. The Windows and Linux ones are very similar. There's some very slight differences. The macOS one is fairly different from those two because of the way macOS uses modifiers and system shortcuts. You can, however, if you're used to the macOS shortcuts, like I am, but you need to work on a desktop machine, for example, a Windows computer, like I do, then you can use plugins like macOS for All, which will install a keymap that essentially is the same you would have on macOS with just a slightly different modifier, so you get control instead of command. And that's very useful because then you don't have to constantly think, oh, I'm on Windows, that's the shortcut, or I'm on Mac, that's the shortcut. In the talk, I'm going to show shortcuts that are applying for the macOS keyboard keymap. They sometimes are the same on Windows and Linux, other times they're not. I recommend that you go and check the IntelliJ documentation online, because on the website there is all the information that you might need, and there's also a very handy picker in the top right of the web page where you can choose the keymap that you prefer using. So for example, if you use the Eclipse keymap because for some reason you like the keyboard shortcuts in Eclipse, then you can just go there and be Eclipse, and like IntelliJ will mimic how Eclipse works to a point without the bugs. There are other keymaps that you can use if you're used to, I don't know, Visual Studio. I think there's NetBeans, and a number of other editors, so it might be easier for you to migrate to with that. The most important thing, though, is that you can customize your keymap. If something that you use very often doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, you can define it. It's very easy. I'll show you in a second how to do that. If you do use a custom keymap and you do end up pairing in person with someone, what I would recommend is to switch to the standard one before you hand them your computer. Otherwise, they will hate you. So the easiest way to do it is to do Control backtick. That shows the switch thingy. You can do keymap, and then you can choose whatever keymap you want from the list. It's very easy. It takes a second. As you can see, I'm using macOS copy, so I'm using the macOS keymap, but I've customized it a bit. And that's how it would show. I'm too lazy to name it, yes. The basic shortcuts. So I'm going to go through a number of shortcuts today and features and things, and I understand it can be overwhelming. So if there's one thing that you need to learn today, it's this. The search everywhere dialog is super important, because you can literally search for file names, class names, method names, command or actions as they're called. I think in 22.1 you can also search for git commits and branches, so you can switch from there. I'm not sure. I mean, it's there, so I guess you can. You can also, yeah, obviously this is the wrong, sorry. This is the wrong image, but when there is something in the editor that has a squiggly line or the light bulb next to it saying, then you can go with the cursor to it and press Alt-Enter to bring up the menu with the quick fixes. In many cases, but not all the cases, there is a preferred quick fix, and that the tooltip that appears will tell you if you press Alt-Shift-Enter, then it will automatically apply the quick fix, so it's one key press instead of two. If you are in some panel, say you open the project panel, as you can see at the bottom, that's Presentation Assistant that tells you that's what I pressed. So if you're curious, those are the keyboard shortcuts that I'm pressing in real time. Should also show the Windows and Linux ones as well. So now I am in, the focus is in the project tool window, and to bring the focus back to the editor, I can press ESC. Now I'm in a preview, so you don't really see the cursor. But if I go back to project, what I can do, I can also close it by pressing Shift-ESC. That's fairly more convenient than going hunting for the small button in the top. If you want to go up to the navigation bar, which is the stuff here on top, you can do Alt-Home. Obviously, I don't remember how it is on the small keyboard. I usually have the full keyboard. But yeah, whatever. That's the keyboard shortcut. It's not one I use a lot, but I know a lot of people that use it very frequently because it makes it easier to navigate your code by folder. So it's useful. And the last super important thing, which is a subset of search everywhere, is find action. So this way you can do, I want to extract something, and I can search for extract. The interesting thing is that it also does fuzzy matching, so I can do image, obviously that doesn't, yeah. So you can only have part of a word there, and it will match it. If you're looking for files, a very interesting thing, or for classes as well, you can have part of the path. So if you know you're looking for a file that is called something and is in a certain folder, you can put part of the path there. So like / name of the folder, / space the file name, and it will only, like it will pre-select the file that matches the path as well. Okay, so these are the very basic navigation shortcuts, but navigation is very powerful in the IDE because you can, again, bring up you can do shift, and it will bring up search everywhere. But you can also go directly to and filter, narrow your results to be more useful, to go to classes. So Command O on macOS will pre-select the classes tab. You can do, even when it's open, you can add a shift to the mix, and that gets to files instead, which is particularly useful when you're dealing with Kotlin code, and maybe you're looking for a specific Kotlin file, but then the classes will not find it because it might just be top-level declaration of functions. Speaking of functions, if instead of the shift you use option, then it goes to the symbols. Symbols, if you do compose, is incredibly useful because it gets you method names. So you can get to a composable directly by just typing its name. It's very powerful. That's how to find stuff. If you just want your history, like browser history, you can do recent files. It's Command E, and it brings up the list of all the files that you've last edited. You can also show the ones that have been edited since the last time you committed. So if you do Command E again, that will, sorry, it's not since the last time you committed, it's that have been edited ever, not the auto-generated ones. And you can see on the left, it also has the very useful mnemonics to say, oh, you can open the commit panel by doing Command O, for example. Command 0, sorry. So you can do Command 0, and it opens the commit panel. Similar, but not identical, is recent locations. So it's in the files that you've been working. By just adding Shift to the keyboard shortcut to open to the recent files, you get inside. So you kind of can remember that, generally speaking, when you add a Shift to a keyboard combination, it's a modifier in the sense that it either switches to a more specific version, or in some other cases, it will go backwards. So if you're in the code and you're looking at something and there's a shortcut that goes down the code, if you add Shift, it will go up the code. So that's something fairly useful to remember. In the recent locations, you can see all the things that I've edited this morning, so you know what the latest bug fixes were on my slides. Very interesting, but I cannot show it here, so I need to open the main file. I can show the structure. So this is interesting. Well, this is a fairly simple file, but you can see the structure, you can see all the methods. So if you're trying to search for a method inside of a file, and it's a big file, just Command F12, and like every list in IntelliJ, you can actually filter it by just typing. So that's also very easy. Instead of start to scroll, and maybe you passed it, and you have to go back. This is the very, very useful keyboard shortcut that very few people know. You can be among the few that actually do this. Okay, then I don't have a way to show it without breaking things, but I guess I can break things. Also, as I'm navigating through files, you can see how the various shortcuts are useful, because now I just thought, oh, wait, I just closed the main.kt file, and I can show something there. So I just did history is Command E, somewhat. The sound is the same. And then that brought me to the file that I just opened. And so now I can go here and type something random. And if the Kotlin plugin allows it, then you have an error. And then now the very interesting shortcut is F2. If you press F2, the the cursor will go to the next error that you have in the file. If you have anything red, it will take precedence over anything there is a warning, but if you only have warnings, it will cycle through all the warnings. And here we think again, oh, F2 goes down, but if I have multiple errors, for example, and I am here, I can do F2 and it will go up. But I can also go back here and do Shift F2 and it's going to go up. So you remember when I was talking about using Shift to invert some things? F2 is one of the commands that if you use Shift, it will go up instead of down. Okay. When it comes to, oh, I keep closing the file that I need. It's not particularly smart. It didn't work? Okay. Thank you. I can keep it here so it's a bit easier. Okay, so another thing that you can do that is fairly useful is, you probably are aware of that, you can command click on something to go to its definition. So if I command click material theme, it opens up the sources for material theme, and we're all used to this. I know people, I don't know why, I know people that use this to read the documentation for a method. I don't understand why. You can open it here. Do it here. You can do F1, I think. And it's very useful because then you don't have to open the file, read the documentation, go back, just learn this one shortcut. I think it's one of the ones I use the most. And I didn't even write it in the slides. But it just came. You see, it's the kind of thing that you just get used to and you don't even think about at some point, and it just comes automatically. And it was very difficult to compile this list of things I use the most because I don't think about it. It's kind of muscle memory at this point, and that's the beauty of it, but also why it's so difficult to make this kind of talk. So instead of doing command click, if you don't want to get to the mouse, what you can do is you can do command B, and that will go to the declaration, or if you are at the declaration, it will give you the list of usages for something. It's fairly useful because one keyboard shortcut does two things, both go up the hierarchy or go down the hierarchy of declarations depending on where you use it. And you can also, for something, like I'm in a declaration here and I want to go to other declarations of the same thing, for example, to see how this stuff is used. So what I can do is I can do command Alt-B, and that, sorry, that's implementation. Yep, my bad. You can, no, I'm mistaken, sorry. Yeah, command Alt-B will go to the implementation, and as you can see on the left-hand side, you can go to type declaration. So if you look at, like you might have a variable, for example, and this should go, yes, to the declaration of coroutine scope, because scope is of type coroutine scope. So it's fairly useful, saves you to say control or command click to go to the declaration and then find the type and then control click the type. This saves the intermediary step and you can just go directly to the type. This is one of the keyboard shortcuts that I'm personally trying to push myself to use. I don't use as often. That's why I'm a bit struggling with I don't know the shortcut for this by heart yet, but I'm working on it. I'm going to get there. Very interesting as well, you can have tests for things. I hope you do have tests for things. I do not have tests for things in this demo project, but that's kind of the point. With Command-Shift-T, you can go to the test for the current class or function. If there is no test, like in this case, the IDE is like, I couldn't find anything. It matches by name, so if it doesn't find any match, it will tell you, do you want to create a new test instead? And then you can do it, and then you have, you can just create stuff, and you can say, oh, which test method should you generate? Do you want a setup? Do you want a tear down? And you can choose superclasses, whatever. I don't have any of that stuff here to show, but the very basic case is it creates in the test source set, it creates a class that has the right name that will also import the JUnit stuff for you, and then you can go and be like, generate test function, JUnit5 should say hello. I haven't touched the mouse. I have a test. Well, I have a test that won't work, but that's up to you to make it work. Last thing that I find very useful is if you are on some symbol, be it the declaration or the usage, you can see where it's used. And one way to do it is to right-click and do find usages, or you can do Alt F7, and it will pop up the find tool window at the bottom, the panel, and it will show you all the usages. Even more convenient, I find, is Alt Shift F7, which doesn't work for some reason. Demo. So the idea is that if you use Shift as well, well, I can double check what is the actual shortcut. It should be that one. Well, whatever, I don't know. I might have screwed up the Keymap as I was testing things. I'm sorry. But the idea is that it just shows it here instead of opening the panel at the bottom. It shows a pop-up that contains all the lists, and you can just go there more quickly by just using the pop-up instead. Then, have you ever heard of camel humps? Is there anyone here that uses camel humps? Florian? Yes? Anyone else? Yes? Only three people. Okay. This is amazing, and I don't know why it's not on by, well, I know why it's not on by default, but sometimes you just want to get in the middle of a very long name, and it's very annoying because you have to press the arrow or use the mouse a lot of times. Well, what if I told you? You don't have to do that. So let me find a long name. Well, I can create a long name. So I can do val. Hello, this is a test. I'm Italian, so it's ciao. But let's say I want to say, to change something here, and I don't want this is a test, I want that is a test. So what I can do is I can go to the settings and search for camel in the editor general smart key, and I can enable the camel humps words setting. And what that does is it just goes to the next capital letter in one direction or the other. So I'm just doing Alt right or Alt left, and I can just go to the next word within a word, which is very useful because then you can do stuff like this. You can select just a bit, and you can delete just a bit. It's very good. Or you can directly just delete a subword inside of there. This is something that you don't think is going to be helpful until you start using it, and then you go to, I don't know, Google Docs or something, and you don't have it, and it's bad. At least for me. I got so used to it. It's one of those things. There's some things in the IDE that I wish I had across the OS that would be so much better. Another one of them, I'm going to skip a bit ahead, but another one of them that I wish I had everywhere in the OS is the toggle case. So if I wanted to change something from lowercase to uppercase, I could retype it, or I can let the IDE do that for me. That's very nice, especially when you're renaming things. Maybe someone screwed up the renaming. So you can just do Command-Shift-U, and it will toggle the case of the selected text. If it is a mixed case, I think it will make it all uppercase or lowercase first, and then it will start toggling. So this is also particularly useful. Talking about things that you have to select, I'm absolutely not going in order. I'm going free flow at this point. I'm YOLOing. I'm sorry. But you can also, and this is particularly useful when you also have camel humps, you can move inside of a word, but you can also select just a part of a word by pressing extend selection. So there is an extend and shrink selection shortcut, which is here. So it's Alt plus up or down on macOS. And you can extend it, and it will first get just the word you're on, which if you have camel humps is just a sub-word maybe. Then it will expand to the statement, then to the larger statement, then to the larger statement. So this way it's very easy to say, oh, I want to copy all that with context. Maybe I want to copy the whole line. Maybe I want to copy the whole line with the intent. Maybe I want to copy the whole body of the try. Maybe I want to copy with the parentheses. Maybe I want to copy the whole try-catch. Maybe I want to copy the entire contents of the coroutine scope. You get the point. That's very useful because then you can also go back if you overdo it. And that's very useful if you're trying to copy some stuff, comment out some things. This is going to save you quite a lot of time. And speaking of commenting, you can comment a line by doing command /. There is also a way to comment with a block comment, so just a part of the line instead of the whole line. Also, you can toggle the block line, the line comment, which is useful if you're just playing with code and you want to say, that doesn't work, let me rewrite it, I'm just going to comment it out. This is the easy way to do it. But you can also use the block comment if you only want to comment one part, say, this doesn't work. So I want that with context to just essentially do nothing. Then what I can do is I can leave the with context call, and I can add a block comment with just adding alt. Obviously, this brings up macOS. I forgot to change it. Sorry. But yeah, it will just comment with block comment. So, but yes, it will do that. You can, oh yes, another thing I really like is, did you know that you don't need to move the cursor to add a line before or after the line you're on? So you can do Command-Shift-Enter to go to the next line and create a new line, or you can do Command-Alt-Enter to do the same above. That's fairly useful. You can also say, that space there doesn't look too good. I'm just going to move it down, maybe a bit more. It's fine. And you can add another line, and then you can select multiple lines, and you can move them up and down. You can also delete the entire lines very quickly without having to go to the end, select to the start, and then press the arrow up, and then press delete. There's a shortcut to just delete the entire line, which is Command-Backspace. And as you can move lines up and down as a single line of text, or you can move a line as a logical statement. So if I do move the line as text, this try is going to go up by itself or down by itself. But if I move it as a statement, it's going to move the entire block, which is very convenient when you're trying to rework stuff around. I think the other important thing here is multiple cursors. How many of you ever use multiple cursors? Almost all of you. Should I skip it? It's fine. I'm just going to be very quick. So you can have multiple cursors by lazy way, Alt, Shift, mouse click where you want. Keyboard way is you have your cursor on a word and you do Control-G, and it selects the word, and then selects the next one, and it selects the next one. You can do Control-Shift-G to deselect the last one you've selected. And then you have multiple cursors, and you can put them where you want, and you can edit multiple lines at the same time. You can copy and paste multiple lines at the same time, which is very useful if you're doing, creating like test data, stuff like that. That's very, very useful, because then you don't have to constantly copy one word and then go on every line and put it in each single one. You can just create multiple cursors and paste once, and it will fill all the cursors with the stuff you have copied. Sort lines. This is interesting because I am going to do it in the build.gradle. You can sort lines. There's few cases where it makes sense. One that I like is the dependencies. So now they're in alphabetical order, and I didn't have to do it by hand because I'm lazy, but I'm productive. Last thing, I don't really have time to show it too much, but you can inject a language inside of a string. So you can tell the IDE, hey, that string is actually, I don't know, a piece of JavaScript, and then we'll enable highlighting and code completion in the string as if it were a piece of code. The way you do that is just write something, and you can Alt-Enter, and you can do inject language or reference, and you can choose any of this bazillion of supported languages. There's less of them in Android Studio for obvious reasons, but you can say, oh, actually, that's Markdown. So now what you can do is you can get, you can say, this is actually bold, and then it will highlight it as, well, this is actually italic, but you get the idea. That's very useful if you're dealing with SQL, with Markdown, with HTML, all that sort of stuff. So you can inject, tell the IDE, we understand each other. Use that language instead of plain text, because otherwise, why am I using an IDE in the first place? And last thing, I'm going to go very quick on this, because I'm kind of running out of time, but very useful stuff. There's always a generic keyboard shortcut that then gets you to other keyboard shortcuts. And one that I find particularly useful is refactor this. So it's Control-T, and it will bring up a choice of things that you can do to where the cursor is. In this case, I have dispatchers.main. That's a bad example, but I can say, oh, I want that to be a variable. So I can do var, or just press 3, and it will ask me, what do you want exactly to become a variable? In this case, I want dispatchers.main, so that's fine. You want to replace this instance, or all of them with a variable? And if you say all of them, it's smart enough to put it outside of the scope where it makes sense to be. And then you can type the name, you can choose any of the names there, it's fine. But that's the slow way to do it. The fast way to do is Command, Alt, and then a letter. So for variable, it's V. So if you do V, then you do the same thing, and it will do enter, enter, and it will create a variable. But you can also do P. What do you think P stands for? Yes. So you have the same UI, and then you can choose where that parameter will be declared. So in this case, I have a method, and I can say, oh, pass in the dispatcher. And you can say, well, obviously the type is going to be the one that it knows about, but you can also change it later, and you can set the name and whatnot. You can do the same thing for properties. It is Command-Alt-F. You need to think in terms of this keyboard shortcut was made for Java, so it would be a field. So F stands for field. Same for functions. You can extract a function of the selected code block, but how are functions called in Java? Methods, so it would be M. And then you can also extract constants, which is less useful in Kotlin than it would be in Java, and that would be C for constant again. You can also extract interfaces, superclasses, just use refactor this shortcut, and you have a lot of choices, and it will make your life a bit easier when you're trying to refactor your code, make it look a bit nicer, get some parts of it out of the way. It's also nice because when you extract an interface or a superclass, it will also offer you, do you want to have that new interface or class in the same file, in a different file, and then if it's a different file, where do you want to store it, what's the name, all those kind of things. Last thing is you can go to a method declaration or function declaration, and you can change the signature. Like, just it opens up this, you can add variables, you can move them up and down, you can change visibility, return type, name, all those things, and it will change, update the code everywhere in your project. But the interesting thing is you can also do it in the editor, change something, like call this usernames, and then you have this prompt here, or you can do Alt-Enter, and then you can confirm the refactor automatically, so you don't have to do a million things. You just make the change you want to see, and then confirm it. I am almost out of time. And yeah, I also only want to mention there are live templates. Live templates are awesome. You can create a function by just writing fun0, and it creates a function, and you can call it whatever you want. Hello class, whatever. Yeah, it's sort of broken, I think, in the last version of the Kotlin plugin, but there's a ton of templates, and you can find them here. You can create custom ones, which is very useful. For example, I have created one that is Logger. So you have a templating language that is called Apache Velocity, and you can create variables. You can say, oh, this class variable that I have created here, it's actually the name of the class in Kotlin that the cursor is into. So there's a lot of potential there if you do stuff very often. I remember I created some time ago a bunch of live templates when I was still doing Java that allowed me to create builders very easily before auto-value was a thing. But then you could create something by just typing 3-4 letters. It would create the entire scaffolding, and it just set maybe the name of the method or something like that. There's also templates for files and code. I'm not going to go through those, but it's essentially the same thing, but applies to an entire file. Interesting thing is that you can also edit those. So for example, you can say, oh, when I create a class, you can make them private by default, which is something that I do. And then you have postfix completions, where you have something like, you can have some value, and then you can say, I want to create a variable out of that. So you can do .val, press enter, and you have created a variable. And yeah, oh, that happened. Live demos. Where were we? Yeah, well, we had finished that, so that's fine. Version control. The IDE works very well with Git. The very cool thing, I'm not going to go through the basics of using Git with the IDE, because you probably know them already. I am just going to show you one very cool thing. If your project is hosted on GitHub, on Space, I think as well, you can, if you're online, other thing I hadn't thought about, you can see a list of open pull requests in here, and you can review the pull request and leave comments in the IDE with the ability to navigate the code, which you cannot do on pull requests on GitHub. And it's very convenient because you don't maybe remember what something does. You can just, it's an editor, and you can do whatever you want. It's read-only, but you can still use the shortcuts to go to implementations and so on. Okay, last few things. I am just going to mention them quickly, but you have stuff like analyze stack trace. There is no shortcut for that, but it's interesting because you can have, like, someone sends you a stack trace, and you just paste it. You can also enable this to have IntelliJ analyze stack traces that you have in the clipboard automatically if you want, and it will actually linkify things, so you can go to the actual code that caused the exception, which is fairly useful. The code style, you probably have dealt with it. There's just one thing I wanted to show you very quickly, which is that you can go full on, not the color scheme, code style. And there's one way that you can go full on, especially useful if you deal with views with XML in Android. You can tell the IDE, this is the order I want stuff in. So whenever you get a piece of layout code or a resource or something, you do reformat, and the IDE will know based on these rules that, I don't know, the ID goes first, then you have style, then you have something left, then you have something start, then you have something end. So it will sort attributes for you, and that's very convenient, especially if you're sharing this stuff within the rest of the team, because then everyone will format the code in the same way, and the order of things is going to be always the same, and you don't have to waste time on a pull request saying, actually the order of that is wrong. It's not according to our style guide, which is good. Scratch files, super interesting. You can create some files that are not tied to the project. They're actually stored in a location that is the same across the machine. And the interesting thing is, that you can create like Kotlin playgrounds. So you have a Kotlin file that you can just type some code in, and you don't have to create a Kotlin file and then run it. It runs in the IDE. It even shows you the values as it's running the code and shows you like hints and stuff like that. Local history, yes, that's a good one. So local history is essentially the same as a Git history, but it's local and it's automatic. So you don't have to commit. You can pick something and say, this is a certain thing. You can add manually labels, which are kind of like commits. But the great thing is, if you screw up your Git repo for whatever reason, local history probably still has the right stuff. So it has saved my butt more than once. And I strongly recommend you check that before you pull your hair out. Last thing, you can do Markdown in the IDE. It's fairly good. There is a plugin that is called Grazie Professional, which also implements auto-completion of text. So as you're typing, it will suggest completion of the rest of the phrase, and it's fairly cool. And given I have 1 minute left, hey, there's a lot of very cool plugins. These are the favorite ones that I use all the time. There's some that some kind folks on Twitter have recommended. These ones, again, I recommend you go and see the repository for the list of that. There's no point for me going through all of those plugins. You can look at them. They're all linked to their web page, so it's fine. And you can, I'm going to pull up the link to the repository once again, so you can pick it up, and it's this one. And that's, what did happen to the time? I don't know. Hello, thank you, I'm done. Sorry, I went slightly over time. I would say if you have questions, but I'm already over time, so if you have questions, I'll take them there, well, outside, maybe better for the next speaker. Yeah. Thank you.